Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are located today. Thank you so much for joining us in this day number two of the Wellness and Wellbeing Global Summit. We are going to have three amazing conversations today. Yesterday, we had four panels, and they were all amazing. If you missed any of the sessions that we had yesterday, do not worry. We recorded everything and it will all be available to you in the Hacking HR Lab by next week. So I am hoping that whatever you missed from yesterday, or if you have to miss something from today, that you can go back and watch some of these videos. Please let us know in the comment section where you are connecting from. We would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from today. That would be great. At the same time, I want to encourage all of you connected and watching this session right now to feel free to just share your comments, your questions, whatever you have in mind in the chat of this LinkedIn Live, so that we can perhaps, if possible, bring some of them up to the stage, to the panel. If not, well, you interact with the your fellow participants and audience members in the chat box. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. As I mentioned before, we are going to have three very powerful panels. We're going to begin the day with a session, with a panel on creating a culture of coaching and mindful organizations. Then we're going to move on to the second panel of the day, which is going to be connecting the dots between wellness, well-being, and business success. And the last panel of the day will be around productivity, performance, and how to deliver the best human experience at work. So we have a very packed agenda with a lot of great things that we are going to be discussing during these conversations. But I'm going to be welcoming our panel today for our panelists for our first panel of creating a culture of coaching and mindful organization. So let me start welcoming everybody: Grima, Noel, Sayas, and Jennifer. Hello, everybody. I'm gonna keep, if you don't mind, keeping your microphones muted. There's some background noise coming in from somewhere out there, so please have your microphones muted. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. I am excited about this conversation, and we, given how much how much is happening in the world of wellness and well-being, and how much the work and the workplace are culprits of this situation that we are dealing and facing today in terms of wellness and well-being, and next month being mental health awareness month. This topic of wellness and well-being, well, it was always important, but it's become so much more important today than ever before, because now we see, I think Jennifer is has a little bit of a trouble on her connection, but anyway, now we see the implications of not addressing this mental health, this wellness and well-being crisis, and we see the implications of that at work, in productivity, performance, and people leaving their jobs and whatnot. So that's why this conversation has become so much more critical than it ever was in the past. And this panel, we're going to be discussing about creating a culture of coaching and mindful organization. So let's begin here. I would love to ask you to please introduce yourselves. So if you can just let us know a little bit about you, and then I want to ask you, why do you think a culture of coaching and mindfulness in an organization helps in any way to solve the issues around wellness and well-being and mental health? Why would we even think about having coaching, about having mindfulness in an organization? So if you can respond to that question together with introducing yourselves, we're going to be off to a fantastic start. So who wants to go first? And then from there we move clockwise. Who wants to kick us off? Garima,
I
go
can
ahead, please.
I can kick us off. Yeah. Thank you, Enrique, for first of all holding this very timely discussion, which the entire concept is it's hugely needed, something that we are discussing within the HR community, but I think beyond as well in the corporates. So my name is Garima Gupta. I'm based here in Washington, D.C. area. and I'm the senior director for Relativity, which is an e-discovery company based out of Chicago, but a global organization in legal tech. And I play the role of heading up the HRBP team as well as head of inclusion. So that's my intro. And in terms of the question that you kicked us off with, Enrique, I think I'm a huge fan of coaching, and this is something that I've been wanting to introduce into every organization that I've been working for. And I have been kind of trying to bring it in also from the concept of the DEI lens and how coaching helps in there. And I think here in the topic of today, the wellness and the well-being and the mindfulness, it is also very relevant. And the reason I believe coaching is very relevant to all of this is it's because it opens two areas, big areas. One is it opens self-reflection, and it helps individuals think about what is their role in any of this, right? How they as a manager, they as a leader, or they as an individual contributor have a role to play in this, the great resignation, or this crisis that you called about people feeling that there's too much going on, there's the burnout and all of those things. And what is their contribution, right? So there is this whole self-awareness that rises up as part of this coaching and mindfulness. And then I think the second is this curiosity that coaching pushes you to think about, which is asking the right questions, right? Because each of us have the answers within, and sometimes coaches, and that's the role that they play, they help pull out the answers from us. Because what will help for me in terms of being mindful may not be the same for Jennifer, may not be the same for Noel, or so on and so forth. So I think asking the right questions and therefore generating the self-awareness in yourself, as well as helping the others raise that self-awareness, is kind of that first step of coaching, which helps any organization. When you are mindful, then you are thinking about whether it's DEI, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's wellness and well-being of your employees. I think they're all connecting the dots. So coaching helps connect those dots. That's how I see it.
Absolutely, Garima. Thank you so much for sharing that. And as you are describing and connecting coaching mindfulness with self-awareness, I am thinking about how important this is for the leaders in an organization, given the fact that they are role modeling behaviors across the board. And if they become more self-aware of both positive and toxic behaviors, they would probably be able to better fine-tune what they do and become better examples for the rest of the people in the organization.
Right.
So
because it's not your words, right? It's your actions, which people are actually watching, right? We'd say that to parents, that your kids are watching you, and you may say that don't do this, don't look at your phone so much. But then when you land up looking at your phone so much, then what the kid is learning is that, you know what, it's okay to look at your phone so much all of the time. So when you say no screen time, you've got to model that behavior. You're absolutely right, Enrique, on that.
Absolutely, Garima. Thank you so much, and welcome to the panel. Noel, hello.
Good morning, and I couldn't agree more with what Garina just said. So my name is Noelle Peart. I'm the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Exos, and I've been with the company just a little over 4 months now, and have been in the HR space for a while, learning and development with another company, as well as an HR business partner. So this conversation, to your question, is, like Arita said, is super timely when you think about just the state of the world. And coaches, and now here at Exos, some of the work that we do is health and human performance. And we are a culture of coaches here at Exos. So a little bit more from a well-being and a fitness space, but they also have to unlock things, right, with their clients and with one another. So whether it's you're coaching in a facility, or you're coaching a leader, or you're coaching a peer, the empowerment piece, I think, that Garina started to talk about, is so important. I think that's why these conversations are important and tie into well-being, because you can't focus on, like, everyone's crazy, the great resignation and everybody's leaving. But if you show up the right way now, right, and you have those conversations and you're empowering people to feel included, whether it's from a DEI lens or just a company and a sense of belonging, all of this ties in. So when I think about, how do you create that space? You have to create it by first getting to know people, right? Because, if you don't understand me, you don't know what's going to empower me to want to stay or even to want to leave. And I think that's why these conversations are really important. And when you're coaching for impact, I think is also very important as well, right? Don't coach just to coach to say you did it and check off, but coaching for impact to truly change people's lives. That's why people stay with organizations. Of course, everyone wants money and things of that
Yeah.
nature. But when you talk to people, they're not leaving because of that. They're leaving because they don't feel included, they don't feel empowered, and they don't feel connected and coached, and feel at a place where that they can truly be themselves. So I'm so excited for this conversation. But yeah, thanks for having me again.
Well, thank you, Noel. Thank you so much. And it's one thing that is coming to mind is how fascinating to realize that everything is connected with everything else, right? You can have an inclusive organization if you are not creating self-awareness in your leaders. You can create that self-awareness if you're not providing coaching, and if you're not providing coaching, maybe your diversity initiatives will potentially fail because there are toxic behaviors, many of which we are not even aware of. They are just unconscious biases that we put forward because for whatever reason, and they impact the organization. So it's just amazing how the everything of everything is connected to everything else. So
It's so true. And
yeah.
people are thinking that HR is just this special place, right? And it's siloed. And to your point, it is connected. You can't have HR, right? It is about people without all of these things. So yes,
Yeah.
and super excited for the combo.
Awesome. No, thank you so much and welcome to the panel. Say us hello, man. How are you?
I'm well. Hello, everyone. My name is Asayas Wareta. I lead Inclusion, Belonging, and Community Impact at CSA Insurance Group, and I'm calling you all from Silver Spring, Maryland, the suburbs of DC, or one of the suburbs. There's a lot of wonderful things that's been said, so what could I possibly add? But I'm going to try. And what I would put to continue what Garima and Noel put forward around coaching really being an enabler, if not a foundation for anything that the organization does. And the linchpin really being the self, right? The reflection of the self and the knowing, the continuous knowing and exploration of the deepest parts of ourselves and ensuring that we are truly living up to the highest versions of ourselves. That's what I think coaching provides. And coaching is really, as Garima said, asking questions that really support someone in that deep exploration. Now, coaching isn't neutral, right? Like we often think like, oh, you just ask the right questions, but your questions are informed by your values, by your lived experiences, by multiple things. And so we often can think like coaching is something that everyone does or can do. And yes, it's true, but it's not without that deep work and that deep self-reflection, right?
Yeah.
That one has to do as a coach continuously if they're going to hold space for someone in a way that doesn't cause harm.
Yeah.
And as organizations, we often expect our leaders to coach without really providing them the trainings and the continuous support to be able to coach in a way that is transformational, as Noel said, and that also helps live up our values. What I love about coaching is that it really centers this idea that our culture is a living organism and it's continuously morphing, and so are we. So deep exploration, deep knowing, and really sitting with yourself and thinking about what's going on. Why am I reacting this way? What's coming up for me? Right. And exploring that really, I think, can help our organizations ensure that we stay in alignment with our values and really bring our culture and our values into like an embodied space and not this philosophical thing of like, this is who we are as an organization. Yes, but are we living out who we are in every ways that we do, that we can? And are we really living it up in the hardest points where we might be asking folks to deliver? Are we valuing in the ways that they're delivering and ensuring that the ways that they're delivering our goals are also in alignment with who we want to be and our aspirational selves as individuals, but also as organizations?
Absolutely, Sayas. Thank you so much for sharing that. And two things that come to mind is one, sometimes the disconnect between what many organizations, not only in the wellness and well-being space, but in the diversity, equity, inclusion space, say that they are doing, and what actually is happening behind the doors of those organizations, right? That misalignment that very often we see because PR wise, it's fun to say that you are inclusive and that you care for the wellness and the well-being of your people, but then inside you have all these toxic behaviors of, overworking, over exploiting people, and all that translates into negative consequences for the wellness and the well-being. And the second thing, which, by the way, for everybody here, we talked a little bit about that yesterday too, is there are leaders that, coming from a very positive and truly genuine place of wanting to help others, not having the tools to do that appropriately may not be conducive necessarily to the best results. So having, like you said, Isaias, having the tools to help others is as important as helping them, because if you don't have the tools, you may actually be doing something that may end up being worse than what you were trying to solve in the first place.
Yeah, it's the mindful element that I think you're really connecting nicely, Enrique. And mindfulness, right? Like at the end of the day, I think I fall trapped to this idea, oh, I'm being mindful right now, right? As if it's like this one thing that I'm mindful. No, it's actually a process. And what coaching, the connection to coaching, as you just said, is that it allows us to continue to check in with ourselves and with those that we are in community with, to ensure that there is alignment between intention and impact. And where there isn't, there's an opportunity to pivot in a way that gives us the outcome that we're looking for.
Absolutely. And we're going to be exploring more of that during the conversation. Thank you, Isaias, and welcome to the panel. Last but not least, Jen, hello.
Hello. Good morning from California.
Hi.
I'm Jennifer Vasquez. I am the VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Golden State Warriors. And I am here in San Francisco for Game 5. So I'm super excited. And of course, being in the sports world, coaching is number one, right? Coaching and mindfulness. It's been interesting. And again, timely, Enrique. And I love the direction with Hacking HR is really being thoughtful in terms of what are we seeing, what are trends, what does the future of this work look like, and certainly integrating the DEI lens. I'll say it's been interesting with coaching. I've seen it morphed now into direction where previously or traditionally it's been coaching for senior level executives. It's been more of an individual engagement. And oftentimes it was in silos. So you never really knew what was happening with that individual engagement. A lot of it was building the relationship for that personal aspect of it. But now just being mindful of leveraging those frameworks for an organizational shift. And I feel that coaching and being mindful is the conscientiousness of an organization where you talk about what are your values and you're living and breathing those values. And this transformation that's happened in the past 2 years, I would say, especially in the DEI world, it's really transcended in a way that, to Noelle's point, HR is no longer HR. I mean, we're seeing this people operations where how do we integrate this concept of learning and building a learning culture with coaching at the forefront of these conversations. It's also talking about leaning in on curiosity and ensuring that there's these conversations happening at every level of the organization. And that's where the inclusion piece comes in. And I'm seeing that coaching and the frameworks of coaching is really integral to this because it allows for feedback. Coaching is about feedback. Coaching is developing this understanding and how do you receive feedback. And, to my panelist's point around self-reflection and self-awareness, I think there's also this self-reflection or more organizational reflection of what are we doing with our teams and how are we building this culture where we're accepting people and we're accepting failure in a way that allows people to also thrive. And so that's being mindful, and that lends itself to also the mental health challenges, right? Because a lot of folks are dealing, and it's been exacerbated because of the pandemic, they're dealing with their individual mental health challenges, but then also thinking, well, I've got to show up at work 100% because nothing less is expected. And so this is where that coaching element comes in, where we lean in on how do we provide the support and have these conversations and allow people to fail or allow people to learn and improve, because there is no perfection. When we talk about innovation and we talk about these innovators out there, how many times have they failed and how it's evolved in success? And so how do we build that into a broader coaching framework. So I'm really excited about this timely conversation and certainly exchanging ideas and thoughts around these subject areas.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for being here and for sharing all those thoughts as well. And in fact, as you're saying, we are expecting our people to give 100%. It seems that now it's like 150% or 200%, because now that we are working remotely, the wrong assumption is people are not fully working. People are not really doing what they need to do, which is not true. So then it seems that we have to show even more than what we were showing before, to tell others, yes, I am working, meaning now I have to respond during the weekends to those damn emails. Now I have to be connected until like 9 p.m. because, well, if I am not responding at 9 p.m., then my boss may think that I'm not working at all, right? So it's gotten even worse than it was before in terms of what the expectation is around, how much we have to be connected and how much we have to be delivering and whatnot. So, thank you so much, Garima, Noel, Esaias, and Jennifer. I think Jennifer is frozen again. But thank you so much for everybody for being here. I am excited about this conversation. I want to ask you one question, but before doing that, I want to once again acknowledge our audience, everybody connecting from so many different places. Dubai. Please let us know where you're connecting from. Dubai, Ukraine. For those of you in Ukraine, I hope you're safe and you're well. And we're all sending you energy, thoughts, prayers, for your, for a prompt resolution to this awful, horrible situation that you and your fellow citizens are going through. We have people from the US, Hungary, India. We have people from Egypt. Let me see who else is out here. Please let us know. Hello from Africa, but where in Africa? Let us know where in Africa you are located. Spain. Africa is such a gigantic continent. Malaysia, Peru, let me see, the Netherlands. Please let us know. I'm going to read a couple more. Please let us know where you're connecting from. And DC, Maryland, US, Greece. Thank you so much for being here. Please continue letting us know where you're connecting from. If you have any questions or if there is anything that you want to bring up to to the conversation, whether among your peers or your fellow participants or to the panel, please post it in the chat. So I'm going to ask you all, dear panel members, one question. I don't even know if this is if this will ever happen, but ideally, if you were able to design from scratch and make it happen, and design the perfect organization that truly embraces mindfulness and coaching, you are able to design that organization. What do people experience in that organization? What does it look like? What does it have? How do people behave in that organization? Generally, I like these kinds of questions because even though I know it's an ideal state, none of us are there, and I don't even know if we're ever going to be there. I like to help others participating in these conversations. I love when they have this idea of visualizing what's possible and then start the journey to try to get there as close as possible. So what does this ideal organization that embraces mindfulness and coaching look like? How do people behave? How do leaders behave? What do people do? Everything that you want to say about that ideal organization. So anybody who wants to kick us off here.
Enrique, why don't we try this, that we each go around and say one thing, because this is the topic. I think you can see the smiles on our face.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, ding, ding, ding. Now we can just continue to speak for an hour.
Light bulbs are going off.
Say one thing and we kind of pass the ball. So I'll start us off to say, I think there's if you look at what Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, did recently with his org when he became the CEO, he brought this, growth mindset and coaching culture at Microsoft. And look at what that cultural shift brought to the organization, with a huge, shift in the way they think, and therefore huge productivity as well as, revenue generation, and everything started to happen for Microsoft. So for me, that's an example that is here. We all know it. We've all read the white papers and the case studies and all of that. So want to say one of those things that, it's not totally a dream. There's a possibility of some of that happening. So I'm going to pass that on for Noel to say the next thing.
Awesome. Thank you, Garima.
I love that. I'll say true transparency. You know, I think it is one of those things. Like, you know, there are companies that people say, "Oh, we're transparent. We tell people, you know, what's going on," and it's selected, right? It may be senior level, or you know, it may be lower in the organization where they're having the conversations. But true transparency, where a part timer can have a real honest conversation with the CEO or the board. Like, and those are spaces that I think when you think about a culture of coaching, right? Like that someone's not afraid to do that. And I think that's really important, that if I'm that part timer and I see something, or I see whether it's in a town hall and a conversation, and that it didn't sit well with me, or I have questions, like I should feel comfortable reaching out to the CEO and having a conversation, and not getting, you know, a generic response back, but getting a conversation. Because when you're able to coach both ways, right, not just down to up, but up down, I think that is part of that work. So I would say transparency would be one of those things that would be needed at all levels. And then honest, I guess, response back, right? So not just being able comfortable to say it, but also getting an honest and creative, maybe constructive, depending on what it is, response back that leads to action. So
I love the idea of transparency. I know Esaias is going to go with you in a second, but just got to say one thing about transparency. Every business and everybody for that matter, you know, we all have to make tough decisions in life. And for a business, sometimes that is laying off people, and sometimes it is letting somebody go. Sometimes it is moving people from one team to another. And in my experience, given that this really impacts the wellness and the well-being of the employees, people suffer more when they don't know why decisions are being made than by the very decision that is being made. If you tell people, look at our finances, this is how we are in pain right now. If we want this organization to thrive over the next, you know, many years, we're going to have to lay off 10% of our people. I remember in 2020, I don't know if you remember, Airbnb laid off 25% of the people in their company. And the letter from Brian Chesky was like a testament of empathy, of love, of caring for their people. And he explained why they were making those decisions. Now the company is doing much better. But it's that transparency that truly creates the opportunity for people to say, all right, now I have an understanding which helps me with my mental health, my wellness, and my well-being. Even if I don't necessarily align with that decision and it's painful, at least I know why it was made transparently, right? So thank you so much, Noel, for bringing that up. I just wanted to make sure that this idea of transparency truly is embedded in the conversation of wellness and well-being. Thank you for that. Esaias.
Awesome. You know, when I think of an ideal place, I actually just think of a place where there's grace, right? Particularly grace for yourself and grace for others. And I think oftentimes folks can get themselves to a place where they have grace for other people, but I see it being a really huge exercise to give grace to themselves. And so an organization where there's grace is really one that is a great organization.
Oh my gosh, I love that word is so beautiful. I mean, not just the meaning, the very word is so beautiful. Thank you so much for bringing that up, Isaiah. So I so love that word. Thank you so much for that. Jennifer.
So I would say I'm smiling because I'm thinking of this utopian workforce, right? Where, and I preach this in terms of DEI, when we talk about the energy that our Gen Z bring in, it's also preparing them because they're going to be leaders. And so for me, seeing an environment where, and I could venture to say that we've all had those bosses that were not prepared to be leaders. That wasn't a requirement in terms of competencies, including empathy and grace. And for me, it would be preparing people managers to be effective leaders, right? So not just the technical skills, or not because you've been in a position for 5 years or 10 years and you're elevating and having that upward trajectory, which is great, but that you're being equipped and coached early on. And so we're seeing this desire with our Gen Z to be coached, especially in a vastly intergenerational and multicultural workforce, which has shifted the paradigm around the workforce and the future of the workforce. So I would say equipping the future leaders with skills, so we no longer have to have these conversations, right? Everyone's equipped to be empathetic. Everybody's equipped to lend themselves grace, and transparency is no longer subjective. There's a general understanding of what transparency looks like. And so I find myself in conversations where they'll say, well, we're transparent. We, especially in tech, well, we released certain numbers. Well, you're releasing data that you want to release, right? Because you want to shape that narrative, and it's very skewed. And so that's not transparent, right? That's not being fully transparent. And everything that's unfolded. Enrique, you mentioned Airbnb. We all heard, the better.com layoff on Zoom, and we are seeing now what's unfolding at Twitter. And these, this unfortunately is, it's just a byproduct when you're in innovative spaces for the most part, but also when you have shareholders and you have, these interested parties that don't think about the employees. And so the staff doesn't have a voice in that sense. And there's no transparency around that, right? That's why you're seeing it trend as this quote unquote hostile takeover. And, people are just seeing the uncertainty. And I think that relates itself to this sense of fear. And I would love to be in a situation, or at least future generations, to walk into the workplace with no fear. Guarding them, right? And so that's when we talk about everything from mental health to the challenges that we've all faced in the past 2 to 3 years now. There's a lot of fear, and it's perpetuated because of toxic work environments that continue because of poor or lack of real leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Jennifer, thank you for sharing that. And I especially want to highlight, once again, this idea of leadership in shaping the culture and creating that culture actually of mindfulness and coaching. Very often you find leaders that believe in this, and Garima mentioned Satya Nadella before, which was a significant shift in Microsoft's sort of organizational behavior, if we can call it that way, versus their previous CEO. Now an organization that is more focused on the human. But the reality is that without leaders, it's going to be very hard for us to to make significant change. Because yes, I think we all believe in bottom-up transformations and change, but it's it's especially in private enterprises, it's so hard when you don't get leadership buy-in. And actually, I'm going to turn that into a question, which is the question of leaders, which is the question about from in our roles in HR. How can we create the case for an organization that embraces coaching and mindfulness? And I ask this question because there are leaders who, if you talk to Satya Nadella, he may say, let's do it, because this is the right thing to do for the people. But most leaders are not Satya Nadella, and most organizations are pretty far from being what Microsoft is. And there's still a big gap between them believing that this is something that matters and them thinking it's something that matters for the business. Those are two different things, right? So we have to convince them that this is not just something that matters for the humans, it's something that has an implication and consequences for the business. So how do we address that? How do we talk to those leaders in our organizations? I'm going to give you a second to think about that question. Want to go once again back to our audience, thanking everybody for being here. I know you're asking some questions. I'm going to try to bring some of them to the panel. But if not, please continue, keep it up, chatting with your fellow participants in there. Please keep telling us, letting us know where you're connecting from. We have new people now from Croatia, from Kenya, Mozambique. So thank you so much, all of you, for being here. Just keep chatting, keep letting us know, your thoughts and your ideas about all these topics that we are talking about. So going back to all of you panelists, I want to ask you, what do we do from HR to create the case in front of those leaders that creating a culture of mindfulness and coaching is not just a nice to have for the people. It's not fluffy hippie thinking. It is an actual business imperative with business consequences, both in terms of making that business more competitive or, costing it more money if we don't do the right things. How do we do that from HR? Who wants to kick us off here? Noel, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's something that I talk about also in the DEI space, and I'll start with, and I know everyone has some ideas, but I'll start with storytelling. I think that's so important to make the case for change, right? And it's sad that we're still in a place that excuse me, we're saying like we have to convince someone, right? Because we shouldn't be at that place where we're talking about people and how it impacts the business. But what I find is with storytelling is when you connect it, right? So when I tell you my story and we're talking about different leaders, and now that leader knows me, right? Like, so when they think about the business implications, they think about how this affects Noel versus just this random employee. And when you can tell that story of whether, hey, it's from a mental health standpoint, right? This employee had a breakdown, or there was, opportunities in terms of maybe some things that we provided, and because of that, here's the implication to that employee, right? Or here's the situation. That's when someone's like, oh, wait, like that's real versus, to your point, sometimes it's the fluffy, like when we say, oh, like, hey, when companies are diverse, they're more productive. Everybody knows that. But when you put a story behind and a person and a connection point, then it's, oh, wait a second, like Jennifer's a real person, right? Like, and I know her and I know her story. It feels very different and it touches people. I mean, think about with COVID, there were people who felt away, and then when it connected to them, then it's like, it's real. So I'll use it as a first example, but I think storytelling is a way that we do it, that we don't have to convince people, that they feel it, they're emotionally connected to it, that empathetic piece kicks in. And I think that starts the conversation.
Yeah, I love that idea of storytelling and teaching leaders how to be storytellers themselves and how to be vulnerable, because storytelling, especially if you're telling the story of your own life, that requires a lot of vulnerability. And I think, by the way, I gotta say that I think we all have to do our own part, because we have all these expectations from leaders, but then we have a bar on them that is so high that we don't allow them to be vulnerable either. If they come forward saying, I'm dealing with this, everybody will be like, oh, wait a second, you're the leader, you're supposed to have the answers to this. I mean, that bar is unreasonable. So I think we all have to do our part here to also give them the opportunity to be vulnerable, because as they are, then we are all encouraged and role modeled to also be vulnerable. So I like that, Noel. Thank you for bringing that up. Who wants to add to this question? What do we do with HR to leaders? Jennifer.
I'll say, I want to preface this by saying, HR has evolved a great deal. We have people operations because we look at everything from the human capital management to our operations, our day-to-day processes. I think it's really important to call that out because DEI has been historically under that space, but it's not just HR's responsibility, right? So I think it's really important, and Noel mentioned this earlier, and it just alluded to the notion that HR does not operate in silos, and it's really important that the culture is not just driven or the sole responsibility. I'll add, I love diving into the power of vulnerability. I love that. Even as a DEI practitioner, it's been hard for myself in sports, even more so. So I love that, I can use, oftentimes we hear the analogies of sports, right? And when one of our star players was injured and there was a lot of backlash on Twitter, and and it affects the mental health, and you're thinking, well, these are people too. So I use the analogy of the way that we condition our players and we think about their mind, body, and spirit is the same way that we need to ensure that the rest of our employees. And so of course that resonates, especially for a lot of our leaders that have been in sports and entertainment for their entire careers. And so they really, that piece of the storytelling, to Noel, because I think storytelling is so powerful, right? And that storytelling has been very integral into how I'm having the conversations. But I think it's something that could be learned across industries and can translate. because it's really important for that vulnerability and to show that example. And when you connect through that storytelling, I think that lands much more solid, especially when you're talking to different generations, because I think that's really important to mention, because working across these generations, the dynamics is beyond fascinating. I mean, I'm looking into case studies to see and how, the evolution of this new workforce has really shifted and pivoted the conversations. But also with those that have been in the workforce for decades, these are conversations that were never had. It was very coming to work, you separate your personal and your professional. And this is the silver lining with COVID, because I think that has allowed for expansion of understanding that, to be authentic. And that again could be subjective as well, is you can't check experiences that you're having as me as a Latina, or somebody as a Black person or Asian, like there's experiences that happen outside of, and that's where that coaching and mindfulness comes in, is that you can't tell somebody to compartmentalize anymore. That's just not the world we live in.
Yeah. And there's I love that you're bringing this idea of thinking about the generations that we have now working together in the workplace. Because there are different expectations, and actually the expectations of each generation are changing as they get more, I think, connected to other generations, or they see how the world is working today. And part of building mindfulness and coaching in organizations towards with the end in mind of becoming or building better wellness and well-being programs and strategies, I think that's now an expectation that people across the board, across different generations have from work. So, and that's, also one of the reasons why so many of them are leaving their jobs. Like Noel said at the beginning, it's not just for money anymore, although of course that always is important, but that's not the only reason. It's just, they are seeking respect at work. They are seeking flexibility. They are seeking a workplace where they can thrive and grow. And this is like, the baby boomer who came back to the workforce after being retired for a couple of years because he or she was called back, given the fluidity in the talent marketplace, or it's true for the youngest Generation Z, person who just came to the workforce and says, like, forget it, I'm not going to be exploited in this, thing here, so I'm happy that you're bringing that up. Garima, Isaias, do you want to add anything to this question? Our role from HR towards leadership?
I think my two adds to what Noel and Jennifer very beautifully described, so absolutely +1 to those, is also that sometimes in our quest from HR to say, let's curate the employee experience, we forget about the manager experience. And these days we ask a lot of our managers. And I think, Enrique, you were pointing that out earlier. So I do feel that it is important that we show them also, alongside, maybe it's storytelling, maybe it's something else, what does it feel like to be mindful, and how does that impact your performance, right? As Jennifer was saying, that the whole mind, body, spirit aspect of it, how, if there is a way for us to get them to experience that, when you are in this space, your productivity, the way you operate, the way you work with your direct reports is going to be so much at a different level, that that itself is such a valuable lesson, that for them to be able to, buy in it would be there. And then the second thing, I think, the transparency piece that you brought out, and Enrique, you were enforcing, is I think where people kind of go into transparency, sometimes what I've seen in organizations, leaders believe that transparency is about spinning it, right? That you have these comms team and they can write these beautiful things. And they feel like transparency is about, spinning the narrative. And what happens is, lots of your employees are very smart people, right? That's why you hired them. They read between the lines of what you're not saying and what you're trying to hide. So go as transparent as you are honestly able to, rather than, being that. So I think those are kind of my two ads for the leaders to say, from an HR side, if there's a way for us to give them that experience, right? So how do you feel when a coach really is able to extract those answers that you are holding within, right? I truly believe that's what a coach does. Then you're able to experience, oh my God, this is such a life-changing thing. And also, if you are able to experience that mindfulness that we are talking about, to say, when you use your breath work, or when you have that mindful moment, when those aha things start happening so frequently that you surprised to say, oh my God, I knew all of this. Why wasn't I able to do it? Because you are running from Zoom to Zoom, meeting to meeting, the virtual corridors have, oh, let's run to the toilet. Oh my God, I ran to the toilet and came. It's such an achievement that we all, oh my God, I left my son there. And, those are the conversations we are having. How do you have that? What do you need to let go? That is also part of the mindfulness. What do you need to say no to? And what do you need to be okay with in this run and the race that we are all doing, right? Like you were saying, that at 9 o'clock, if my phone dings, this urge to, oh my God, I should answer right now. How do you remove those? Because once you as a manager do it, then your ability to model that and to be able to guide your employees in that space, it creates so much peace. And that, what we are trying to say, that, hey, work can be peaceful and not always this fire lit under you all of the time. So I think for me, those are the two ads, that yes, transparent, go as transparent as you can, right? You don't need to go all for it in one go, but you can take steps to it, but stay authentic rather than the spin. Because that's one thing that I've seen. Employees are like, oh my God, they're spinning it again. And they know it. They do know it.
And one thing, by the way, is that a lot of these things that we're talking about now may have sounded in the past as a fluffy thinking, right? I mean, it's like, oh, here comes HR again with some story of something that they wanted me to do. If that was the case at all, I don't even think that HR was putting forward these conversations in the past either. But now we have the science to say people are overworked, they are overconnected all the time, and look at the implications of that in mental health, depression, wellness, well-being, and therefore the reasons why they are leaving companies. So you can build a comprehensive story here of saying, you want people to respond at 9 p.m., they will do it, but only for a certain amount of time. And by the time they say no more, they will leave. And it will have been much more expensive for us not to have sent them that email at 9 p.m. than now letting them go because they don't want to work with us anymore. We have the science to create that case in this, in this era that we're going through right now. Esaias, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that. What comes up for me is this idea that coaching oftentimes feels like this almost like coaching becomes therapy, and therapy is coaching for some folks, right? I think there's value for coaching, full stop, if not exclamation mark. I think for some members of organizations, it's to what end, right? So you might need to connect coaching. Coaching can't just be this indefinite thing. Coaching can be a tool. I think it's often useful to use it as a tool in a greater cultural shift or cultural framework that you're working in, or else you're asking folks to engage in so much emotional labor without end in possibly a culture where there is no value or reward or recognition for it. So connecting it to your strategy and having clear metrics and reward system for that kind of labor, for that kind of growth becomes important, or else there's no incentive for someone to do that work when you're really promoting or valuing someone who's producing, but not necessarily to the same depth or quality or in alignment with the culture that you have espoused to be a part of your value. I think that's important. And I think for some of us, it's difficult, as many of our colleagues just said, in terms of, well, what's the purpose of this? What's the actual results? I am a firm believer of storytelling. And for me, it's show me just as much as you're telling me. And so what I'll often do is I'll find someone who I know is ready for that kind of deep work, get them in line, go through the process of it, and then let them tell the impact and the story that they've done. A prime example is at CSA Insurance Group, we've been introducing a 6-month coaching experience that's focused on diversity and inclusion, right? Wow. And so 6 months in the beginning, we're actually using the IDI, which is Intercultural Developmental Inventory, which is an inventory you take and it places you somewhere around the continuum of your comfort of navigating across differences and similarities. So they go through this experience where they're expected to come with real life challenges, with things that they're dealing with, right? But oftentimes it's hard for people to think of those things. And so having the inventory that tells them this is where they're at, this is the things that they can do, can help them situate some of the things that they're experiencing in a practical sense, right? Like to help them think about those things. So they go through coaching, and at the end, we actually do the IDI again and talk about, this is what the progress has been for you. This is what you can continue to work on. And having such growth in the IDI in 6 months is actually rare, but we've seen a lot of great results in the mindset. And so having things that they can, really measure themselves with. And I'm not the kind of person who's measure. Believe me, I think there's a lot of value to things that you can't measure, but for some folks, they need that, right? And so giving them that opportunity is really important. Connecting it to your greater strategy and creating value and reward system is really important. And if you can get the evangelizer to be someone who is in a high level position, who is respected, who is valued, and who's respected in a way that, folks who are like, well, what's the business case for this? If this is the person who they look to for the business case and they can bring in this element and connect it via their own story, you've won.
I love that, and all of it, and I especially want to make sure that this last part that you commented on, we re-emphasize it, which is building those allyships in the organization and making sure that you have champions of change and champions of coaching, mindfulness, wellness, well-being, diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you have many champions for all of these ideas, have them all, because when you have respected people in the organization, putting these ideas forward and making sure that everybody else sees what they're doing, then you create a stronger case and maybe even get more allies across the organization. So thank you so much, Isaias, for sharing that. We are getting closer to the end of our chat. We only have like 2 or 3 more minutes, and I want to ask you one last question. If there are 2 or 3 capabilities / skills that you would like HR departments or HR folks to embrace for them to be able to create a culture or to shape a culture of mindfulness and coaching, what would those capabilities or skills be? What would you want them to learn to do better individually, but also at a departmental level in HR? And this is going to become a little bit of the homework for those who are participating in this conversation. If they have not learned or embraced the capabilities and skills that you're going to be sharing with them, I think it's good to put them in the learning roadmap. So anything that comes to mind.
I can get us going, and I would say maybe it's don't catastrophize, right? And just be in the moment, value the experience over the policy, and grow the circle.
Love that. Thank you, Sayas. Noel?
I would say leaning in with vulnerability, understanding, and as I said it before, understanding how important storytelling is and who is telling the story. And also understanding that feedback is a gift. So in order to enable these coaching cultures, feedback has to be a part of it. And feedback is a gift. And I had a mentor that said one thing about feedback. She said, when feedback is a gift, either you receive it, you re-gift it to someone else, or you return the sender. So what you do with that feedback is important, but feedback is a gift.
Love it. Being teaching others the art of feedback, providing and receiving feedback, and especially for us, because we talk a lot about it, and sometimes we even forget about how to either give or receive that feedback in HR. Thank you, Noel, for sharing that. Jennifer, and then we close with Garima. Jennifer, you're muted. Jennifer? Are you there? Hello. Garima, let's go with you, and then we go with Jennifer.
Okay. So again, beautiful ads, and I will add only 2 things that as HR folks, listening is always a skill that you're developing, but I would say deep listening, so that you are listening for meaning and you are asking the right questions. So deeper listening, because we are also always in solution mode. Immediately we try to solve the problem because that's who we are. So deeper listening, don't just jump to the solve, but listening. And then I think inviting possibility. In this time, since the last 3 years have been very tough for HR folks, I would say let's keep hopeful and inviting possibility, because there is still a lot possible. There is still a lot of hope. So those are two things that I would like to send everybody who's listening today with: inviting possibility and deeper listening.
Love it. Thank you for that, Garima. Jennifer.
Yeah, so I'll add, I do want to make one call out, because we have global listeners. I think it's really important for HR practitioners and DEI practitioners to really understand the multicultural aspects of this work. Oftentimes we have HR folks that don't understand some of those cultural nuances. It's really important. And coaching is, and this, my fellow panelists alluded to this, there are several comments, but coaching isn't a one size fits all. It's really looking and reflecting on the organization. What is the organization desired state, right? What is the, and it's almost like reflecting, and Garima, you had mentioned kids, and I was smiling earlier because it's sort of like that circle of life moment where you're reflecting and saying, are we at the adolescent stages of this work? Are we progressing? Are we advancing in certain ways? And for HR practitioners, it has been very challenging. Everything has fallen, and it's almost like they've been the counselors, the people to go to for COVID safety measures. And so, for those that have experienced that, is really, an introspection of prioritizing yourself as well. I feel that there's this expectation that you're nurturing everyone, but you're not nurturing yourself. And it's really important to give yourself grace as well. It's been a very trying time for the HR community and the DEI folks that fit within that space. And so I think that's really important, the capability to have that introspection. And well said, no is a full sentence. I think that's, challenging folks with that idea, notion is really important in having that capability, because I feel the pressure on HR is always yes, 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 and no reflection or opportunity to really prioritize and say, no, this isn't a priority right now. So I would say those are some capabilities, but again, just leaning on that also awareness and understanding some nuances.
Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you for bringing up the element of self-care, by the way. I think that is so important. So Garima, Noel, Esaias, Jennifer, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. This was awesome way to, it was an awesome conversation and an awesome way to kick off the day. For everybody who is listening to or tuning in right now, stay tuned. In the next 4 or 5 minutes, we're going to be coming up with the next panel, which is going to be connecting the dots between wellness, well-being, and business success. So stay tuned. We're going to be coming back to you in the next 3 minutes. So Garima, Noel, Esaias, Jennifer, thank you. Stay well and stay safe. And I'll see you all soon. Thank you.